for a minute, take some time to talk about, because those are the guys where a lot of the emails are coming in, and I hope I address some of your questions, some of your concerns, and we're going to go ahead and move forward with my favorite part of the show, the start bench. Week 2, and we're going to jump right on in, guys, and we're going to start at the quarterback position. I mentioned this when we went over the quarterback rankings. Justin Herbert, right? You know, there were a lot of emails that were questioning his 2017 potential after 1 week. They played Southern Utah. Now, blowout, they did allow 21 points, but it was the Royce Freeman show. And if we learn one thing, that Royce Freeman is back. But guys, you got to give Herbert a few games. That offense is still going to put up some points. I don't have any concerns over Justin Herbert. Matter of fact, if things don't change with Herbert after they face a Nebraska defense that gave up over 400 passing yards to Arkansas State last weekend, then we can have the conversation. Give him another weekend. I say he's a start. Week 2, Justin Herbert, quarterback. Oregon hosted Nebraska. Quarterback Nick Holley. And you know, I don't think a lot of fantasy owners are going to look for him to start this week. Nick Holley, Kent State quarterback, playing Howard this week. Now, Holley's probably a little bit of a forgotten man. I don't even know if he would be available on the waiver wire in some leagues, because his point production was very minimal against Clemson last week. But we know that that offense is very run heavy, right? They play Howard this week. What do we know about Howard? They only pulled one of the biggest upsets in FBS history last week when they upset UNLV. According to odds makers, that's what they say. Howard gave up over 340 yards, though, to UNLV on the ground. If they gave up over 300 yards on the ground to UNLV, Nick Holley's going to run through them. And personally, I hope Howard keeps up with Kent State. That's more Holley plays. I think you've got to pick up Nick Holley. I think you've got to put him in your lineup. He's going to have a huge week 2. Nick Holley is a start. Kent State quarterback versus Howard. Let's go to the running back position, guys. And there's a few guys that I actually like on here. I've got 4 running backs listed, and I'm going to start with James Gilbert, the running back, Ball State. They travel to UAB this weekend. Gilbert carried the ball 19 times for 74 yards and a touchdown last week in a 24-21 loss to Illinois. Now, if there's one thing that we learned in 2016 is that Gilbert has workhorse potential, and he has the matchup this week to be that workhorse. I expect a huge load for James Gilbert for Ball State this week at UAB. Put him in your lineup. James Gilbert, running back, Ball State at UAB, week 2 start. Gus Edwards, running back, Rutgers. Rutgers is hosting Eastern Michigan this week. Now, Edwards he toted the rock 24 times last week. He only had 79 yards, but you got to keep in mind, that was one of the better defenses in the nation, Washington, right? So I wouldn't consider that a bust. I think what I'm reading into more is that the coordinators and the coaches have enough confidence to give Edwards the ball 24 times against Washington. This week they play Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan has already allowed a 100-yard rusher this year when they played Charlotte last week. I'm looking for Gus Edwards to really break out this week, over 100 yards, get on the board, find pay dirt, get Gus Edwards in your roster this week against Eastern Michigan. And then here we go, guys. Another running back, Corey Taylor, running back, Tulsa. If you purchased our preseason projection tool, you knew that Corey Taylor was next in line to be the running back once when Ramadi Warren was ruled academically ineligible. There's room for 2 running backs at Tulsa. We learn that every year. And D'Angelo Brewer is definitely going to be the top guy. But Corey Taylor right now may have more potential than D'Angelo Brewer. As a matter of fact, last week against Oklahoma State, it was Taylor who went over 100 yards and found the end zone twice. And you know what? This week, that was against Oklahoma State. This week, they play UL Lafayette. They're hosting UL Lafayette, who gave up a slew of points to Southeastern Louisiana last week. And I'm telling you, this week, if you've got D'Angelo Brewer and Corey Taylor, you can, if you've got either one of those guys, there's enough fantasy production in that matchup to play both running backs or for both of them to be starters no matter whose roster they're on. get D'Angelo Brewer, get Corey Taylor in your week 2 lineup. Running backs, Tulsa playing UL Lafayette. And the last running back on the list, Justin Crawford, running back West Virginia, playing East Carolina this week. You know, Crawford topped the 100-yard mark in week 1 against Virginia Tech. He only got 13 carries. And, you know, I think the West Virginia offense will probably lean on Crawford more this week, considering their matchup. They're playing East Carolina. East Carolina gave up over 400 yards on the ground last week to James Madison. Get Justin Crawford in your week 1 lineup. Big week from him at home against East Carolina. And then, you know, guys, I'm going to save this last start. I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to jump to the bench. I like to save the starts for last. I didn't do that this week, but I'm going to go into the bench. I'll come back to my last start. I'm going to bench Anu Solomon this week. Quarterback Baylor, playing UTSA. You know, last week Baylor lost 48-45 to Liberty. Solomon passed for 278 yards, 3 touchdowns. He nearly had 100 yards rushing. He had 97. And you know, he's probably the second best rusher on the roster now that Terrence Williams and JaMycal Hasty are both hurt. But you got to keep this in mind. The UTSA defense is going to be, at least, it's going to be better than Liberty's. And the Anu Solomon didn't even complete 50% of his passes last week. So I do have concerns there on his production. I think Anu Solomon, quarterback Baylor, is a week 2 start against UTSA. Man, I hate to see this name on the bench list, but Sam Darnold, USC, versus Stanford. You know, if, like I said, if we compiled the list of fantasy disappointments in week 1, Darnold would be on that list, if not top the list. You know, if you would have told me USC would have scored 49 points against Western Michigan and Darnold wouldn't have a TD pass or top 300 yards, I wouldn't have believed you. Now, he did add one on the ground, so he didn't give you a clunker. But compared to what you thought you were going to get, Darnold, I thought he disappointed. Now, week 2, I think he's going to be better, but his ceiling's only so high. He's going against the Stanford defense. Now, we know the history there, right? Stanford's defense has always been solid. Darnold could put up decent numbers. I just don't know if you want to take a chance against the Stanford defense in week 2 when there's so many good matchups on the slate this week, so many favorable matchups for quarterbacks. You may just want to give Darnold the week off. This may be the one week that you actually bench him if you have some decent quarterback depth. And I'm even talking about if you play in a Power 5 league single quarterback format. You may want to consider leaving Sam Darnold on your bench week 2 at home against Stanford. Mike Boone, running back Cincinnati. They're playing at Michigan this week. And I'll tell you, I feel real encouraged about Mike Boone this week. He had 19 carries last week. Only twice in his career before that had Mike Boone ever carried the ball 19 times in a game. He did it the first week of the season. However, he goes to Michigan this week. We know what Michigan did to Florida last week. I want to say that they held Florida to fewer than 20 rushing yards. I don't feel confident in Mike Boone and the Cincinnati offense this week, week 2 against Michigan. I think that's just a flat-out bench. Keep Mike Boone on your bench week 2 at Michigan. Here's a guy that was high on the preseason rankings, right? Devin Singletary, running back Florida Atlantic. And I'm telling you, there's some people willing to jump off the tracks. Now, here's where you're an advantage for watching this as I touch on Devin Singletary. I don't think he's going to do well against Wisconsin. I don't even recommend starting him. Had Devin Singletary rushed for 300 yards last week, he was on this bench list week 2 as soon as I saw the schedule. This is the toughest game Florida Atlantic will play all year. Devin Singletary needs to be on your bench this week. But I'll tell you about Devin Singletary, and I'll give you a tip right now. Keep an eye on him. For those of you that watch this video, you're going to be at an advantage here. There's going to be some people that get impatient with Devin Singletary. They're going to drop him. They're going to drop him after this week. And if he ends up on the waiver wire, go grab him. sit on him. They have to run that offense through Devin Singletary. It looks like Parr's going to be the quarterback. They're talking that Caleb Woods is coming back. DeAndre McNeil's there. I don't know what's going on, but Devin Singletary is the one surefire hit that they have on that offense. And he's going to land on a waiver wire somewhere because of this Wisconsin game. Grab him next week if that happens. LJ Scott, running back, Michigan State versus Western Kentucky. We stated our case on last week's show. We didn't love LJ Scott in 2017 for the reasons that we mentioned. There's just a lot going on over there. Now, he did lead the team. He got 15 carries last week, but, he averaged 2.6 yards per carry. And I have to tell you, I'm not saying it would be the worst thing to start LJ Scott, but like I mentioned with Sam Darnold, there are so many quality matchups for fantasy matchups on the week 2 slate. I almost think you have to explore other options, especially, now that you've got Stewart getting touches, you've got Madre London, you've got Gerald Holmes. There's so many mouths to feed in that Michigan State backfield, and LJ Scott was probably the least productive of the bunch last week. I have concerns moving forward with him. I think he'll be okay. I'd rather take off a week. I want to see another week unfold in Michigan State's backfield before I throw LJ Scott into the starting lineup. And then a receiver that I like him all year, but I did warn you that he had 2 dangerous matchups in the beginning of the year. Keyshawn Johnson, he was on our sleeper list at the beginning of the year, wide receiver, Fresno State. Fresno State won 66-0 last week. I think he had like 7 catches for 120 yards. I wish that game would have been closer. Keyshawn Johnson would have probably gone over the 200-yard mark. But you know what? It is what it is. He still gave you a decent output. But he plays Alabama and Washington in back-to-back weeks. And so not only, here's a guy that you may even, it's tricky to how to play him because if you need the roster spot, it's hard to hold on to him right now because they play Alabama this week, Washington the following week, and then Fresno State has a bye. And if he has a clunker this week against Alabama, I wouldn't even argue with anyone that needs the roster space to drop him and go back and get him 2 weeks later. So that's something to consider with Keyshawn Johnson, but he's a week 2 bench at Alabama. Now, we're going to close it out with the guy that I mentioned was a start. We're coming back to a start. It's the last guy on the list, and I want to touch on this guy. Christian Kirk, wide receiver, Texas A&M. I know, he's a no-brainer start. He was a no-brainer start at the beginning of the year. Is he so much a no-brainer start right now? In last week's collapse against UCLA, he had 60 yards receiving. Texas A&M on a whole had 89 yards receiving. Christian Kirk had 60 of those yards, and I believe he had 5 catches. Now, Kellen Mond finished 3 of 17, taking over for Nick Starkel. Kellen Mond couldn't even, the only thing he could hit was the grass. I mean, it was just putrid the way that he looked. I'm going to give you something to think about. Texas A&M plays Nicholls, and I think they play UL Lafayette next week. They're going to find ways to get the ball in Christian Kirk's hands, whoever's playing quarterback. Mond obviously wasn't ready. There's a reason why he wasn't named the starter. They're going to find ways to get the ball in Christian Kirk's hands. He's too talented. They have to. Whether it be on bubble screens, just quick hits, hand him the ball on jet sweeps, whatever they do. They're going to get the ball to Christian Kirk. I think he needs to be in your lineup this week. And I'm going to give you something to think. Something to think about, something to imagine. How great would this be after watching Texas A&M against UCLA last week? Give me Christian Kirk in the Wildcat with Travion Williams and Keith Ford at his side, and let coaches in the SEC watch that for 2 weeks while you're tinkering with it, playing Nicholls and UL Lafayette. Give me that. That's what I want to see. That's what college fantasy football is all about. Will we get it? I don't know. But Kirk's going to get his touches. Get him in your week 2 lineup. He's going to be golden this week. I like Christian Kirk at home against Nicholls. They'll find a way to get him a ball. And that's it, guys. That's week 2. We touched on philosophy. We touched on the player rankings a little bit. We touched on start bench. Busy week here at the CFF site. Have to tell you, we're bringing everything down. Hoping to be back online for the weekend to enjoy some games. Get started on the week 3 rankings. We're going to give it to you guys. Sorry, look, we try to get it out to you as soon as we can. There's probably going to be a few errors here or there. Stay up to date on our Twitter feed, on the injury news. We'll try to get that if anything late, comes out. But until then, guys, look, I'm the voice of the CFF site, Joe DeSalvo. And look, we're the #1 trusted source for you guys for college fantasy football. We wouldn't have it any other way. Thanks again, guys. Enjoy the games, and good luck.